Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and welcome back to the Y Factor. You are listening into a very special interview that we will be doing today. It's a two-part interview. You're listening to the first part of an interview with Yassir Morsi. Yassir, assalamu alaikum. How are you going?
Walaikum assalam, Mostafa. Thank you for having me.
It's good to finally see the man in real life. You know, the great the beacon of Facebook trolling,
yeah.
shall we say? How are you going? You're in Sydney for this is your last day in Sydney, isn't it?
Yeah.
How's it been so far?
It's been great. Great to put faces to names and
Yeah.
So alhamdulillah, thanks for having me, and assalamu alaikum to the Y Factor audience. Yeah, it's been fun. I want to thank Sister Hanan for bringing me over and Brother Adam for accommodating me, and you, Mustafa, for that nice endearing smile of yours.
Yes, sir. So basically, just to introduce our audience, we're going to be having a two-part interview with Yassir, in which we'll be discussing a whole range of different topics, ranging from your own personal story, as well as things about local politics, local community organisations, federal government, foreign policy, and so on. We want to try and cover as much as possible. So it is two parts. The first part will be this week. The next part will be next week, inshallah. And I think it's best that we do begin by asking you, Yassir, where did you come from?
Wow, you sound like the bogan on the bus, man.
Yeah. Now, where are you really from? No, but you were telling me earlier that you grew up in Sydney, is that right?
I was born in the UK. My parents are Egyptian, and my first stop in Australia, well, it was two places. We went to Springvale in Melbourne, and then quickly to Mascot in Sydney.
Yep.
And then I eventually settled down in Melbourne. But yeah, I've travelled a bit. But the three main countries that I've lived in is the UK, Egypt, and Australia.
Awesome. You talked a little bit about your travels in one of your talks, the Secret Samara talk. But I think personally, I mean, I just came off my first ever international trip, and I really believe in the power of travel. And you spoke a little bit about that. So tell us a little bit about how important travel is to shaping one's outlook.
Well, very important for a couple of reasons. One, people who live in developed Western first world countries, such as ourselves, sometimes have a certain privilege that becomes blind to us. Just the basics of everything, the little things that our bodies endure, from just assumptions about fresh and clean water to heat and shelter. So politically speaking, it's always been important for me to see how the rest of the world lives, and of course it's just a cursory, very quick glance. It's not something that I can really gain a true understanding of, but to even still to see it, it's always been important to my politics. So yeah, the second point is that someone like me who's trying to be an academic, you can get caught up in a lot of abstract and intellectual discourses and discussions that sometimes require, I think, real concrete experience to give it meaning. And my politics has always been governed by a kind of materiality or worldliness, where it's important to recognize the material and political forces that shape our sense of self and politics. So travel is great, and the Australian dollar is strong. So
Alhamdulillah. So what brought you? I mean, you've travelled the world. You travelled some of the world, and you've travelled through Australia as well. So what brings you to the Muslim community, not just here in Sydney, but the Australian Muslim community?
Well, I wasn't. The funny thing is, a lot of what I am today, I wasn't yesterday. Yeah? My family, I mean, my dad raised me predominantly, and it was quite secular, but not in the sense of ideological. It's just the way he lived his life. So I said this before, but September 11 was a kind of important moment because it began and started a series of questions, and it changed my trajectory in regards to where I was going in life. And out of that, I think I tried to pursue answers to these questions, and eventually it led me back to the Muslim community and really I've stayed there ever since.
You talk about 9/11 as the watermark moment. Now, I've heard from a lot of different people that basically that we as a generation have grown up at the 9/11 generation, and you guys, of course, are part of that. That we've grown into a world that has politicized our existence. I'm assuming that is an important factor in what brought you back. That is that we are under siege, if you will.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, I don't think Islamophobia or Orientalism began post September 11, but it became more pertinent, more in my face after September 11. Yeah, and to continue a word you used, the siege was both internally and externally. You know, I didn't know what to expect, so you wake up the next day and you look at people looking at you, and they may not think a thing about you, but all of a sudden you're questioning whether they see you as a problem, whether they're threatened or whatnot. That's my initial instinct. So yeah, I think we have belonged to a decade and a half or so where one of the underlying features of our sense of being Muslim has been shaped by the war on terror, which began as a narrative on September 11.
When you say it began as a narrative, I'm assuming narrative has a beginning, middle, and at one point an end. At what point are we in this narrative, would you say?
Well, it's shifted a little. I mean, again, I don't want to privilege September 11 because it was my initiation act into the debate, right? Prior to September 11, there has still been, there was still the kind of typology of fault lines of racism and Islamophobia that's been, you know, Edward Said will tell you it's been latent all the way back to the debate between the Persians and the Athenians, the sense of self and other, between West and East. But yes, the narrative has evolved and changed to appropriate, absorb all sorts of various ideas. So where we're at now, all I can say is a community, not so much as the Australian Muslim community, as much as I can speak of it. We're at a crucial point because I think we're beginning to recognize and understand this narrative, understand our place within it, and whereas I would very simply put it this way, our initial reaction was far more gracious than it should have been, far more apologetic, or far more negative and negated. And I think we're beginning to move to the middle ground of the nuances of political rhetoric. And it's not simply about affirming or negating terrorism, it's about discovering the world that produces violence.
That's a good point. I agree on that point about discovering and understanding the world that produces violence. Is a lot of factors that lead someone to do an act of violence. But in saying that, you mentioned two things. You mentioned A, that we're moving towards a point in which we understand our position in the narrative, and B, that we were at one point apologetic. So could you explain those 2 points? And specifically, I want to know why do you think being not why you think being apologetic was wrong, but whether or not you believe it was a necessity of the time, and on part B, the part on understanding our place, what is pushing us towards understanding that nuance?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, I'm not 100% sure. All of us were apologetic in the sense, but the dominant voice that the West wanted to hear was an apologetic Muslim, because it reaffirmed the argument for many that the underlying problem of September 11 and terrorism was an interpretation of Islam. And so when the Muslim community was kind of pointed at to give explanations to why Al-Qaeda or Osama bin Laden did it, it worked in such a way as to reaffirm the relationship between religion and violence. A lot of Muslims intuitively, from the worlds they've come from, as well as intellectually, know a lot more about their countries of origins and their politics, and how, you know, states are certain repressive ones and so forth. They almost see Al-Qaeda and terrorism or Taliban as an internal civil war between two types of versions of how a Muslim-dominated majority country should run. But you're right, I think in the West, at least in our Australian context, the apologetic voice is one. over continually. And by apologetic, let me be clear about this. It's not getting up and saying I'm sorry. It's not saying I'm sorry for what they've done. There was that too. The apologetic voice is to continually attempt to distance oneself from the event. And you asked me if it was kind of
A necessity.
necessity. Yeah, I think it's when you're under that much pressure, when the conversation all of a sudden and spotlight's on you, I think instinctively and intuitively people will feel the pressure to distance themselves and respond. Yeah, necessity, I wouldn't, I'm sympathetic somewhat, but it's been prolonged and continuous, and I can't be sympathetic to what I will loosely say here, the selling out of certain Muslims. That is to say, pointing the finger at the bad Salafi, the bad Wahhabi, the bad Taliban. I just think that's an immature politics that didn't help us in the long run. But necessity, look, you know.
If I may cut in at this point, and I do have something to say. So it's not really an interview. Maybe it's a bit of a debate, bit of an interview, but I think that would be perfect for having you on the Y Factor. In saying that, there are some misconceptions in terms of what occurred post the riots.
Protests.
Protests. Yeah. However you wish to interpret it, it's a matter of interpretation, as is most things. But I just want to point out that the press conference that was held was not apologizing, and nor was it pointing the blame at someone. It was providing a context to both the wider public as well as some of the Muslim public as to who these people are, where they come from, what they believe in, and how that compares to what mainstream Muslims believe in. Now, that's not what came from that was media manipulation, which is an obvious consequence of any media conference by any Muslim organization. But what the difference is that some Muslims have taken on board that manipulation by the media and claimed it as the truth. Whereas that's not exactly true. I mean, it's the media. You distrust them on everything else except for this one point, which is a little bit silly. But in saying that, I just wanted to make that point because I believe that it's important that nobody blames anybody. If you were to ask me or to ask anybody from that press conference, say to them, do you believe that it's their fault? They would say to you, that's a silly question. It's not their fault. Everyone knows that there's a variety of factors that lead one to a violent act, whether it's in the name of religion or in the name of anything. I mean, domestic violence, it's not because you're a violent person, it's because there's a variety of factors there. And I think by simplifying it and saying they're sellouts and they're calling us terrorists, is to really, really lower the debate, if you will.
Yeah, look, there's 2 points to that. First of all, it surprises me that the very act of holding a press conference, which is an assumption of being media savvy, being on the front foot with the media, setting the agenda, it surprises me that, in consequence to that, we say things like the media manipulated us. Well, if you're media savvy, you already know that. And you already know that as a Muslim or as a minority that enters a pre-existing set of assumptions about our politics, that you are going to be manipulated. And to be politically aware of these coordinates of quote-unquote manipulation, if you're going to enter it, know what you're going to do. You have to anticipate this kind of exploitation. That's the first thing. In regards to the dichotomy of selling out and whatnot, yes, okay, it's cheaper than the debate if and only if you point at figures and people and group, which may be necessary in certain circumstances. But the key argument here is selling out is not a conscious thing. It's not the suggestion that people sit there, rub their hands together and say, you know what, I'm going to claim that this person has diluted their loyalty to the religion and the community. Selling out becomes a pressure that is bestowed upon us that some people buckle to. And that is in order to gain credibility, acceptance, or recognition, we have to point our finger at a bad Muslim. Now, does that mean between you and I that I agree with the protesters or I agree with the versions of Islam? Not necessarily. It doesn't mean anything like that. But it means that in our attempt to combat stereotype and generalizations, X, Y, and Z, Islamophobia, don't do the same thing. It's one of the grandest ironies that we as a minority, under the pressure by a majority, and we claim that they're scapegoating us, they're stereotyping us, they're exploiting the fear of the majority. It's the greatest irony that we do the exact same thing to our own minorities in the community. It's fantastic. I mean, on one level, on an ethical issue, you claim the majority shouldn't exploit fear by pointing the finger at minority, and we do the exact same thing with the big W's and the Salafis and the bad Muslims and the Hezbis and the radical Melbourne gaggle, whatnot. Yeah, it's the same
Murder,
process.
radical Melbourne murder.
It's the same process. I mean, so on one level, it's not a case of me saying that people consciously go to the press conference to sell out. It's a pressure that the discussion and the discourse eventually puts on us, and there's seemingly only one exit, and that one exit is to say things repeatedly. They don't represent us, they're not the majority. You even said it, they're not the mainstream. That is a tired and boring discourse that does not bring into light the conditions of why people are angry, and that's what we mean. I don't think, for example, anyone, I mean, there are a few, don't get me wrong, I don't think anyone consciously goes out there to say, let's sell out.
I know I did. I woke up one day and said, you know what I feel like today? No, I mean, there's you made one point. You know, there's seemingly one exit out of this pressure. And by saying seemingly, you're alluding to the fact that there is another. How would you frame an answer to that pressure?
I've said this a couple of times before. The first thing is to know any good, I think, political activist must know the terrain upon which they're performing their activism. That's a fundamental thing. But before we get into answers and solutions, I'm asking first and foremost, know your terrain, know your geography, know what you're negotiating with. It's not enough to have a good intention. It's not enough to have an intuition that what you've absorbed as an answer is a good answer. Because in many cases, your intuitions have been socially formed by privileges of living in the West. So that's the first thing. To answer then, how do we exit other than the way it's paved for us? There's multiple ways. There's multiple ways when we recognize this terrain. And the first thing for me, the instinctive thing I do is to bring into visibility this terrain. So when I get asked a question about whether or not Islam is associated with terrorism, okay, there's a yes and no answer. And there's an answer I believe in. And there's the ifs and the buts and everything in between. But there's also a responsibility to highlight how this question is not natural. It's political. It's in itself, it frames what can and cannot be said. So one exit, other than to answer the question, is to dispute the right of the question to exist in the first place.
Okay, let's test it out. Are Muslims terrorists?
Define terrorism.
I like that. That's good. You're already out of it. No, okay, that's a good point. I agree with you. I mean, it's not as though people can produce an answer, within 24 hours of.
All right. Yeah. You know what? Fine. But why are these people putting their hands up to go before the media and teach the community?
Who else?
That's a myth. The idea that the community is so narrow that it only has a couple of people, and ironically, it's the same people that put their hands up. That's not true. I'm not going to name names, okay? I think the community knows the professional Muslim circuit that's out there.
Should I cough? No, I'm kidding.
All right, but seriously, I just don't understand. I mean, from my perspective, okay, granted, I'll put my hand up and say my personal, I won't say personal, my politics is formed by a reading of colonial relationships, yeah? Fine. Maybe you don't want to read the world that way. Okay, I might disagree with you, but I don't see any other reading that they have. I just see an intuition, an instinct, and that instinct is, unfortunately, the language of the hegemon. It's liberal, even though it may dress up in Islamic garb. It's democratic, even though it may claim it's universal. The amount of time people appeal to human rights, and I know that they have not engaged in a sustained conversation about human rights' implicit relationship in both a colonial legacy prior, in the sense of a humanism, and in the post-World War period, in a way that's helped the powerful control the weak. I mean, as I said before, I don't see why I have to be charmed by a language that I hear every single day. And let's not kid ourselves. These professional Muslims, they haven't sat there and examined continually in a sustained way why they say what they say.
Are you sure about that? I mean, have you spoken to them?
Okay, I should say it this way. They come across like that. And when they come across like that, what they inevitably do is reaffirm a very normative way. I mean, who knows? Look, they may all be brilliant post-colonialists, Marxists, feminists, whatnot, you name it, Islamic theorists, Islamists. They may all be these things, Allahu Alam. But when they come across in their media interviews and their blogs and their articles, they are reaffirming a very normative way of interpreting politics, which ultimately legitimizes the very thing that puts them on the fringe.
So I think this is framed a little bit by your statement on hegemony and basically buying into the politics. How would you explain exactly what that hegemony and what that politics is, A, doing or has been doing, and B, trying to do?
Okay, it's a good question, because I think this is my reading of hegemony. I don't want to make it sound like it's the concept of hegemony. I think a lot of us pretend that we're resisting, which is probably true. But the nature of hegemony today is precisely that which determines how you should resist. And take a look around you. Everybody's resisting something. Everybody thinks they're opposing the mainstream system. Everybody thinks that they've got a clenched fist and, they're challenging the dumb masses, the mainstream politics that has betrayed the complexities of society. That's the prevailing narrative. We all think we're free, precisely at the exact moment we're doing what everybody else is doing. And so the way I understand hegemony is not that there's somebody out there telling you what to think. That we would resist easily, because society is fairly sophisticated enough. If people came out and said, be Islamic this way, especially if it's the government or the media, we would intuitively resist. What happens, and I'm not saying there's a bunch of people around the round table that designed this, it's just the logic of late capitalist society, right? What inevitably will happen is minorities are targeted and described by what they're not. You're not this. You don't have democracy. You don't have an appreciation of feminism. You don't have a kind of diverse cultural, critical heritage that allows you to question yourself. There's a lack of self-criticality. That's the conversation. We're always defined by what's missing. And inevitably, half of our community boisterously comes out and says, no, we do have that. We do have democracy in our tradition. We do have criticality. We do have science. And we inevitably affirm the normative as a response to what we're negating. And that's how hegemony works. No one's coming out there and saying, be this. A few people are, okay? But the vast majority of people who assume in this Muslim media circuit that they're being critical, if you unpack it, all they're really doing is reaffirming the champion values and ideals of the center, and they think it's some act of radical politics because somebody out there has told them they're not it. To put it simply and put it bluntly, and forgive the crudeness of the language, I'll use the analogy of white and brown. White subjects told you were brown, and these brown subjects have responded by saying, no, if you look further, we're white too. That's the underlying politics of this circuit.
And how would you say we should break free from that?
Know thyself. I mean, I know that sounds as cliche as anything, but know that, and I don't mean your ideas. I know your materiality. Know who sewed your shirt together, who put your shoes on your feet, in regards to, from sweatshop owners to the economy to everything about yourself. When you do, then you'll recognize that the idea of it being an identity game between East v West or Islam v democracy or liberalism or whatnot is an oversimplified view. Mustafa and me, Yassir, I'll tell you now, the war in Iraq, as one example, was fought not against people like us, but for people like us. It maintained a particular order which we're privileging from. And just because you're anti-war doesn't mean that you haven't privileged from a continuous system that has exploited the third world. So know yourself, know your politics. Don't, just because you say occupation in Palestine is wrong, does not make you part of the solution. It just makes you part of a crowd. And it's been said time and time again. So to exit this kind of binary of simply saying, I am what you say I'm not, develop a politics that traces the inventory of power upon yourself. Recognize yourself. Which I think, as ideal and naive as it is a starting point.
I think that's a very good point. I think tracing the power that has led us to our current position is an important step that maybe has been missed by some. But again, I will reiterate my own point and my own belief that I think that people are reacting under pressure. It's a necessity to do certain things. Now, we can agree to disagree pretty much, That's fine. I have you on the Y Factor, bro. It's my show. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
It's going to be edited.
You're just gonna say, I love the Y Factor. No, I'm kidding. But no. I mean, okay. You talked a little bit about whether or not there is a clash between democracy and the West and the power struggles that has resulted in. Could you explain that point a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. Just 2 points, but I just want to go back to the initial thing you said. I know I made it sound like that people responded out of necessity and whatnot, but they were also ideological. I was very much involved in the early days.
Yeah, remember, I disagree with you on that.
Yeah. Look, quote unquote moderates, which I do believe is a meaningful term, and we can get to that later.
Part two.
They're as ideological they're as inclusive as anyone. They are as intolerant as anyone, and they did play a political game which attempted to sideline voices that would bring them the most embarrassment and harm and problematic to their narrative. And that included naturally the overly ethnic Muslim, the overly political Muslim, and the troublemaking Muslim who would stand down, sound for all intents and purposes conspiratorial. So it wasn't just innocent, I'm under pressure. There was an ideological element to it. But that's for another time, I guess.
As I said, part two.
Yeah. In regards to your second question, repeat it.
About the struggle, because a lot of people frame our current predicament as a struggle between the West and democracy. Now, I'll put my own personal values, and you can, of course, completely disagree with them. That's fine. But I think that there are some values that are shared. And I remember you said earlier on Monday that their negation is incorrect. I agree with that. I think that you'd be naive to think that just because they're the West, we should disagree with them. But people do believe that. What has that affected the power struggle in a certain way, and how so?
Yeah, it has for two reasons. Critics of democracy aren't very good. Yeah, that's the problem. So they rely on cliches, simple binaries, and so forth. Yeah, that's the first thing. And on the flip side, advocates of democracy are also not very good. I guess all I'm looking for is a sustained debate about... I mean, look, at the start it was like, oh, we share democracy because we have shura. Democracy is not to be reduced to shura. Democracy is about the separation of powers, and it has within it, in a sense, a political imagination of what it means to be the human animal, that we are capable of a rational, consistent debate about what's good for the public. And that's a completely, for some religious views, completely antithetical to the religious subject, which is dependent on a kind of universal or totalization of the view that God and revelation and spirit and tawheed should be at the corner of how we imagine what it means to be a human and how we should be guided eventually along a path that has already been paved through revelation. I mean, when you examine it from that perspective, there is two different imaginations of what it means to be a political subject. That aside, that's a different debate. So all I'm really asking for, in one sense, I'll tell you now, I don't believe in democracy, but we can get to reasons why. All I'm asking for is if you're going to celebrate or critique whatever, know it. Because all we're coming across now is existing positions in the debate. I'm against democracy because it's Western, or I'm for democracy because it's universal. I think both positions are equally phony. That's the reason why I don't think the public... Look, we say a lot of times that mainstream Australia doesn't know Islam. Mainstream Australia doesn't know democracy either. The idea that what we're speaking about is two contested systems that have inherent values. People don't know these values. People know what's celebrated and what's demonized. And it's that simple. And Islam has not been able to register itself in the public psyche as that which should be celebrated, whereas democracy has a long historical tradition as being the solution to everyone's problem. And that's all that's happening in this debate, nothing more.
I think on that point, we will end part one of this interview with Yassir Morsi. Yassir, thank you very much. Inshallah, guys, stick around for the rest of the episode. You're listening to the Y Factor on 87.6 FM.